when we come to see you. The teddy bears are here to play. If you
Number 1. About a year ago, for the month of June, my family went to France for 4 weeks and left me to tend to the house and take care of the animals. My house is in an interesting location. It's an hour from the campus I go to school on, and a 30-minute drive from my work, and 20 minutes from the main town. My neighbors and I have a few acres of land in between each other, and the closest house to me is a 10-minute drive. My house is surrounded by farmers' fields, military property, and then miles and miles of BLM land, surrounded by mountains. Sometimes, I feel like I live in the house from Courage the Cowardly Dog, because of how in the middle of nowhere it is, and how lots of weird stuff happens in it. If you were to Google what a 2-story house looks like, this would be exactly what my house looks like, except it's a 1-story. The second story where all the windows are is just a ceiling space. There are also lofts in my house where my landlord was going to put the second story, but never got around to doing it. It was like they tried to build a 2-story house, but realized there was nowhere to put the stairwell. There is also a large basement and an attic. I have lived in this house for 8 years and have always felt that the house had a weird layout. Next to my room, there is a huge wall that connects to the living room wall, but my room isn't as big as the wall, so there is a large wall in between the living room and my room. Underneath my room is the stairs to the unfinished basement. Now that you understand the layout of my house, you would understand why there would be a lot of birds' nests on the roof. The birds congregate on top of the room during the summer because that's when the most bugs are out for them to catch, and because we feed our cats just below. My room acts like a funnel for the noise of them scratching on the roof and running around. About 2 weeks after my family left for France, the birds started their scratching noises on top of my roof. They do it every hour or so, all day and all night. It's a very unsettling sound to hear at 3 in the morning, and annoying. Then, I started to hear scratching and banging sounds coming from the wall next to me, which is why I thought we had rats in our walls. My mum assured me over Skype that it was probably just birds on the roof, like normal. The next few days, I keep hearing the scratching noises and the banging sounds coming from my wall. Finally, I decided that it was time to check the closets and the basement for signs of mice or rats, so I could buy the proper traps. After checking the basement, I don't find any signs of mice, so I go check the hall closet, which is the only thing in between my living room and my room. It's usually locked because it's full of a bunch of yard tools and my stepdad's shotgun, as well as my archery equipment and a handgun. It's locked because my youngest brother could seriously injure himself. I assume it's locked, but I still check the handle and it opens. I thought maybe my stepdad unlocked it before they left, in case I needed a gun to protect myself. The first thing I notice when I open the closet is that all of the tools are moved to the far side, and a portion of the closet wall is missing. At this point, I'm freaking out and call my best friend and her dad to come over and check it out. I thought about calling the police, but since I live far from a lot of things, I figured me discovering a hole in the wall of my closet probably wasn't enough to send them out. My best friend's dad and brother came over and used flashlights to look into the hole. They don't see anything super weird, so my friend's dad gets on his hands and knees and gets into the hole. When he gets out, he has a look of horror on his face, and he tells us that he found a dirty mattress, a pair of men's-sized jeans, chicken feathers everywhere, and a whole Walmart rotisserie chicken partially eaten. He calls the police and they search the whole house. And find no one, and nothing out of the ordinary. My friend's dad nails a slab of wood over the hole, and I have all the locks changed. The creepy compartment in my closet had since then been sealed up. The scary thing is that because I work during the day and leave the house unlocked most of the time, the guy who lived in there could have come and gone as he pleased until night when I was home. I have 8 dogs, which is the reason my family needed me to stay home. and I never heard any of them bark during the time the banging started, which means the man probably lived in my house for a very long time and my dogs got used to him.
Number 2.
This happened when I was 14 years old. I'm 17 now. I used to be in Boy Scouts and I'm an Eagle Scout now. Back in 2014, my scout troop went on a backpacking trip on a trail called the Lower Chattooga Trail, which was located on the Georgia-South Carolina border. It's a 5-mile hike to a medium-sized campground beside the Chattooga River. Across from the campsite, there is a put-in for kayaks and canoes. There were 11 scouts and 4 adults on the trip, and we started hiking at about 10 in the morning. We hadn't seen anybody so far on the hike, which was really strange because I had always remembered seeing people on this hike, as my scout troop did it about every year. This was until roughly a mile from our campsite. We were descending on a small hill when a man who looked to be in his 50s emerged from the tree line about 30 feet from the trail. He looked like he'd been out there for days. He was covered in dirt, his shirt inside out, jeans cut above the knees, obviously with a knife or scissors. His hair was the worst, long, grey and matted. Since I was the first backpacker in line, the man walked up to me. He was Asian and didn't speak good English, so it was hard to make out what he was saying. He kept asking for a quote-unquote mop. I realised then that he was actually asking for a map. We didn't have a paper map, and none of us had service on our phones, so we told him we were sorry but that we didn't have one. He looked very angry, glaring us down, so we asked him if he needed water, partly because of the condition he was in, but also we wanted him to just get the hell away from us. He didn't leave. He just stood there, glaring us down. We decided to just move on and leave him there, since the older scouts are always faster hikers than the younger scouts and the adults. We would keep on looking back every couple hundred steps to see if the guy was ever following us, but he never was. Fast forward to when we got to the campsite. Me and some of the older scouts hung up our hammocks. We all pitched our tents, messed around in the river, and a few of the younger scouts wanted to go exploring near the campsite, and since I was the oldest scout on the trip, I went with them. While exploring, we kept on hearing rustling noises, and I just blew it off saying it was a deer. In my mind though, I was worried that it was the guy. Because of this, I was really paranoid. Every crack in the woods I thought it was the guy, but it would only turn out to be a squirrel or a bird. 20 or so minutes later, I was starting to feel better when one of the younger ones screamed and pointed his finger at the top of the hill. Standing about 300 yards from us was the man, and in his hand was a machete. We ran all the way back to the campsite, the younger scouts screaming like madmen. We told the scoutmaster, and he, another one of the leaders, and my dad went out looking for the guy. I went with them, as scared as I was, to show them the location of where we saw him. He wasn't there. And my dad said it was probably a joke, since the younger scouts are all pranksters and do stuff like that all the time. After a long discussion of whether to stay or leave, the adults decided to stay the night. We all went to bed, and sometime in the middle of the night, I was awakened to someone walking in the campsite. I grabbed my flashlight, hands shaking in fear, unzipping my tent flap, and looked out and saw nothing. I woke up a few more times to these same noises, but every time I saw nothing. As you can imagine, I didn't sleep the whole night. The next morning, we found all the hammocks had been stolen, straps and carabiners still tied to the trees. One of the adults' backpacks was stolen, along with his backpacking stove. We hiked out in one big group, everyone fearing the worst. We fortunately made it out safely and never saw the guy. We reported him to local authorities, but nothing ever came of it. I still continue to hike and backpack, but I haven't and will never backpack the Lower Chattooga Trail again.
Number 3.
In the wee hours of the morning of August 4th, 1974, I just couldn't sleep. It was stifling hot outside under a full moon. I lay on my bed in our home in a very isolated rural area reading a paperback book. We didn't have air conditioning in the house at the time, so I had my window up and just a screen separated me from the outside. A thick woods lay within about 30 feet away from the bedroom window. The trees looked like a black silhouette against the moonlit sky. It was about 3 AM when I heard a car drive past. We lived on a very lonely country road. Our only neighbours were a widowed lady whose home was located several hundred feet from the end of our driveway, and a single mother who lived on a farm back along further up the road. I could hear the car stop at the end of the neighbour's farm lane. 2 car doors were shut. I became completely alert. I shut off my bedroom light and went to my window where I watched the road. I saw 2 dark figures approaching our property line past the woods. My heart nearly stopped when these 2 men turned into our property and started approaching the side of the house where my bedroom window was located, as well as our telephone wires. In those days, with no cell phones, we were completely at the mercy of our landline phones. If someone cut our wires, we were cut off from the world. I quietly crept across the hall to my parents' bedroom. I awakened my mother and told her about the 2 men outside. She got up as our telephone rang, alerting my father. As my father took the call, my mother went to my bedroom window to look outside. She looked towards the road and saw nobody there. When she looked straight ahead, she saw 2 men standing to the side of the window, looking up at our telephone wires. One man was wearing a light-coloured t-shirt, and the other had a light-coloured short-sleeved shirt that was unbuttoned in front. One man held a cigarette. My mum turned away and quietly went to summon my father. My father's phone call had been from the police. They said that 2 men fitting the very description of the men outside our home had just attempted to break into our service station about 4 miles away. A police officer had turned his cruiser into the service station parking lot and saw the men running away from the building. Our guard dog was barking as the men quickly deserted the area and made their way to a back road behind the station. That road would lead them right to our home if they knew where we lived. Obviously, they did know more about us than we would never know about them. They had to know about the service station and the connection between it and us. They knew where we lived. They even knew where our phone wires were outside of the house. I believe they knew they would be seen by the police and that my father would be called from the house due to their attempted break-in there. If my father had been lured away, my mother, sister and I would have been alone in that house in that wooded rural area where nobody could hear us scream. These men apparently planned to cut our phone wires so we would not be able to summon help. Deep inside, I believe that the plan these men had so elaborately schemed together included possibly murdering my mother, sister and me. I was never so scared in my life. The police were alerted to come to the house. My father got a gun and the men were frightened away. Their plan had been thwarted because I couldn't sleep that night. This story gets even stranger when you get to the part where one of the police officers responding to the call was involved in a car accident and needed our towing service. My father and the police talked at our home while another employee towed the police cruiser that had been in the accident. I can remember sitting with my back against the wall in my parents' bedroom until I saw the sun start coming up and the sky turning pink in the east. The men had left with no clues behind. Things were never normal for me again. I would like to say that this incident was put away in my mind and that things were the same after it happened. Things were never the same. I could not sleep without having a guard dog there at our home. My father had air conditioning installed in our home. My father also obtained a permit to carry a handgun. Our entire family was more aware of the dangers that lurked in our neighbourhood, in anybody's neighbourhood, even in 1974. As I grew older, I learned more about criminal behaviour and true crime. I learned about Ted Bundy and how during the same summer of 1974, he had been terrorising the Northwest, leaving behind a trail of murdered girls who were just like me. Ted Bundy's victims were known for having long brown hair parted in the middle and being college girls. My hair was long, brown, and parted in the middle. I was also starting college later that month in August 1974. I don't believe that Ted Bundy was outside our home that night, but I do believe he was someone capable of doing the horrific things Ted Bundy did to young women in the 1970s. Today, I'm a 59-year-old woman. I've been married for 33 years and have a 24-year-old daughter. I often think back to August 4th, 1974 and wonder, what if? What if I had been sleeping that night? What if those men had got into our house after cutting our phone wires? What if I died that night at the hands of those men? What if I had never been a victim of those men? It could have been worse, but I still feel that I am a victim. And the positive thing that came of me being a victim was that I learned all I could learn about criminal behavior, criminal justice, crime prevention, and even headed up a neighborhood watch program during my adult years. I obtained a position in law enforcement and worked with sex offenders for our local sheriff's office for a time. I like to believe that I am more alert, and that perhaps some of my actions that came as a result of August 4th, 1974 might have helped at least one other person.
Number 4.
In 1987, I returned to work at a small elementary school in a little community in Maryland. I was 31 years old at the time. During the summer, the garage across the street from the school had changed hands, and there were a lot of guys over there working on trucks. I barely noticed them as I went about my business of getting prepared for the new school year. One afternoon, I was going to a meeting for the school with a friend. We took my Corvette. When we were pulling out of the parking lot, I heard a guy whistle at us from the garage. I didn't think a lot about it. School started, and eventually, I began to notice a small red sports car parked facing the school parking lot over at the garage. I had to be at school at 7:30 AM, and I was always early. This garage did not even open until 8 or 8:30 AM, and the red car was the only car over there when I got to work in the mornings. Since it was backed in, I could not see a tag number on it. In Maryland, you have to have front and back tags, so I figured this person was either disobeying the law or from neighboring Pennsylvania or West Virginia. I noticed a guy sitting in this car each morning. He was facing where I parked my Corvette and walked into school. It was really creepy. Eventually, he started getting out of the car and trying to talk to me, often yelling things and whistling at me. A friend of mine who had been a Marine had worked at the school and noticed the guy and thought that he was talking to me. My friend asked me who the guy was, and I told him that I didn't know him and I've never spoken to him. One morning, my Marine friend found this guy inside the school before time for teachers to arrive. The man told my friend that he was apparently looking for the time. My friend told him to leave the premises. This guy continued to harass me as I walked into work, when I was with the children on the playground, and when I left work in the afternoons. He would sometimes be laying under a truck watching me, and another time friends and I noticed him on top of the roof of a box truck watching me. I finally was able to get his tag number and gave it to the police. I had no idea that he was a well-known sex offender in 2 states, but we didn't have very strong laws at the time, and he seemed to be aware of how far he could push the limits without being arrested. We had no stalking laws at that time, so the police advised me on ways to protect myself and stay safe. They also contacted the principal at my school and told him of ways to keep me safe. I was told to stop coming to work early and to never walk to or from the building without someone with me. My Marine friend was usually there to greet me in the mornings. Some teacher friends parked near me and walked out with me in the afternoons. This guy's harassment went on through the school year. I was especially afraid when I had children on the playground and he would watch me there. One day, I noticed his car was not at his job. I was so happy. I did not think I would be encountering him that day. I was wrong. After work that day, he was sitting in his red sports car under the interstate bridge when I got on I-81 south to go home. He sped up behind me and started chasing me down the highway. I mentioned my car being a Corvette earlier in order to explain this part of the story. I was able to lose this guy because thankfully my car was faster than his. Of course, I drove at a higher rate of speed than I should have. I was able to lose him behind some traffic. I pulled into my dad's business and we watched as this man drove around looking for me. He must have given up because we saw him get back on the interstate and head back north. I immediately called the police and informed them of the incident. There was still no basis to arrest him. Winter turned to spring and I was sitting on my brother-in-law's porch on a Sunday afternoon with my sister-in-law. Their home was about 25 miles away from our home, and I noticed a small red sports car in the area while on the porch. The next thing I knew, this guy roared down the road and the man stopped his car right in front of the porch. He looked at me with wild eyes. I screamed for my brother-in-law, who came around the corner. When the man saw him, he fled the area. School ended that year, and this man apparently moved on. I have not seen him since 1988. I've heard that he has harassed a lot of women over the years in Pennsylvania, where he's from. Our laws are stricter now, and our sex offenders have to register and live according to the laws in each state. Ironically, my next job was working as a sex offender register with our police department. We also have stalking laws in place now. I helped with a neighborhood watch program in our town and spent lots of time taking advantage of the free classes offered by our local police on personal safety. I would recommend that others look into taking classes, starting neighborhood watch programs, and as always, be aware of your surroundings. If something doesn't seem right, it probably isn't. Don't hesitate to call for assistance, and stay safe. Hey guys, it's the Grim Reader here. I hope you enjoyed listening through that. If you did, please slap a like, and if you haven't already, why not subscribe to be notified of future uploads? If you have a story you want me to narrate, please send it to my email in the description box. Once again, thanks a lot for listening.